What, you want me to rat out the mob?
Maybe we're going to get to a little bit of that. I don't know. Some of the questions here we got is going to be tricky. But by the way, if you're a movie guy and you like mob movies, if you've seen the movie Casino, you would have seen Oscar Goodman in the movie Casino.
And all I could tell all your viewers, one thing, if they would watch the movie, I make 13 cents every time it's on TV.
13 cents?
13 cents. It's a wonderful thing.
But that movie's played a lot of times, so you made a lot of 13 cents.
A lot of 13
right?
cents. So, still getting residuals. Can you imagine what De Niro gets?
So you were De Niro's attorney in the movie?
I was De Niro's attorney in the movie, and Pesci's attorney in the movie, and Sharon Stone's attorney in the movie, and in real life represented all the people they depicted. Tony Spilotro was the Pesci character. De Niro played Frank Rosenthal, and Sharon Stone was Jerry Rosenthal.
And I know you told me a story last time that Sharon Stone came to your house.
She's a lovely, lovely woman. Not the persona that you see, the tough lady. She's like the girl next door. She's a beautiful lady.
She is. Physically, she's beautiful. You're telling me she's beautiful also as an individual.
As I always say, as beautiful on the inside as the outside.
I have some cool questions I want to go through with you. Obviously, for you to go from where you were at, moving here. So why do you leave Philadelphia to come to Vegas, though? I mean, Philadelphia, like at the time you left 64, it's not like there wasn't any action in Philadelphia.
A different kind of action.
Okay.
The cops there were using billy clubs, knocking people over the head today instead of shooting them. So that's a difference in the action.
I want to know who you were in high school.
What do you mean?
Were you the cool guy? Were you the athlete? Were you the instigator? Were you the 4.0 GPA? Were you?
I was like a 2.10.
Come on.
No, I usually was the dumbest guy in my class. Although I went to the best schools. I went to a wonderful high school where you had to take a test to get into. It was one of the two finest high schools in the United States at the time.
Okay.
It was the only high school in the country that had a president instead of a principal. And then my folks moved, and I went to a private school out on the main line, the Haverford School, and then went to Haverford College, which was ranked #1 in U.S. News and World Report as the #1 liberal arts college in the United States. And basically, I was the dumbest kid in my class. But I loved college. It was like being at the Elysian Fields. It was bucolic. I studied philosophy. I studied sociology. But then I blossomed. I was like the ugly duckling that became the beautiful swan, and played a little football there, played a little baseball there, played a little everything. I was the only undefeated wrestler in Haverford's history. My roommate was a real wrestler, and they were wrestling, I think, Lafayette College, and the Lafayette heavyweight was out, so they took me along, said Goodman's going to be the heavyweight tonight, and no one was there to oppose me, so they declared me the winner, which was very, very good. Champion. I went to law school, University of Pennsylvania, fine law school, Ivy League. But the truth of the matter is, compared to my experience at Haverford, which was just so interesting to me, in those days when I went to law school, I was with people, I'm still friendly with them, who wanted to be corporate lawyers, wanted to be business lawyers, and I wanted to be a civil libertarian. I wanted to represent people, the little guy against big government. So I was unhappy, and got married to my wife, barely made it through my first year of law school. It was a miracle that I made it through, and became even unhappier, not only with the curriculum, but the fact that she was supporting me, and that bugged me. I mean, I couldn't stand the fact that my wife was...
Why?
Why? Because I guess I was chauvinistic. I thought that the man was supposed to support the woman. At least in those days, that's what I figured was the right thing to do. So I decided to get a job. And I walked from 34th and Chestnut, where the law school was in Philadelphia, down to Broad, which is the equivalent of 14th and Market, 1 block off at Chestnut. Went into the DA's office there, knocked on the door, didn't know a soul. And the DA himself came out, Jim Crumlish, and I said, Mr. Crumlish, I said, I need a job. I'd like to be a clerk for your office. He said, well, I don't make those decisions, but you may want to see our inspector, who became United States Senator and a very important person in America's history. He interviewed me. He had just come off the first victory of a prosecutor against a Teamster official, and he was riding a crest. He was very, very popular, and he said, I could always use a research guy. Do you want to work? I said, I really want the job. He said, I'll pay you $1 an hour, but you have to work a 40-hour week. Well, I was the only guy in my law school class who worked at all, because everybody's studying. They want to be law review, order of the coif. I said, I'm so happy. Thank you for the privilege of being able to work. And I worked my tail off. And he was a stern taskmaster, very critical of anything that I did, but constructively criticized me. And a wealthy widow was murdered in Philadelphia. And the fellows who murdered her took $300,000 from under her mattress, came out to Las Vegas to launder it in the old-fashioned way at the crap tables out here.
What year is this?
I'd say 1963.
Got it.
Arlen assigned me to work up the testimony of the police officers who arrested these two fellas while they were in Las Vegas. They got released on a writ of habeas corpus and then went to Omaha. They were rearrested there, brought back to Philadelphia for trial in the murder case, and they raised a Fourth Amendment search and seizure issue as far as the search that took place in Las Vegas. And the two policemen who engaged in the search activity here and arrested them here, they came back, and Arlen said, interview these fellas in anticipation of a motion to suppress. So it was one of these cold, dreary, rotten eastern nights that the wind was just going through this old stone city hall building, and we worked for 4 or 5 hours, and then they said, let's go out to dinner. We had dinner, and to dinner they said, you're a nice kid. What are you doing here? Well, nobody ever asked me that question before. Philadelphians in those days were the most provincial people in the world. I said, where else is there? And they said, Las Vegas. I said, you got to be kidding. People live there? He says, it's a great community. So I went home that night, and I woke Carolyn up, my wife, my dear, beautiful bride. I woke her up, and I said, sweetheart, how would you like to go to the land of milk and honey? She said, I love you, but I'm not going to Israel. so that was the end of that one. And then we decided we would come out here because they promised the new frontier. They said you could do whatever you want in Las Vegas if you have half a brain and you're willing to work. And they were absolutely right. We didn't know a soul. Came across the country, arrived at the top of the mountain looking over the valley here. There were a couple twinkling lights in the desert. And my wife said, where have you brought me? I said, don't worry, this is great. She says, my parents were right. I shouldn't have married you. We settled in. We had lived in a tiny little apartment in Philadelphia. And she said, I want you to have the nicest apartment that you could afford. And I said, well, that's not too much. We have $87 between us. We found an apartment. It's a nice little apartment. It was a two-story apartment. Which
Here?
Here. Two-story apartment that had a little patio out front. I mean, compared to what we had in Philadelphia, which was like a postage stamp, this was like a palace. But one next-door neighbor worked for the Del Webb Corporation, very nice. Another one was the head of food and beverage at another hotel. And across the street was a prostitute who walked a little poodle every morning, and I got my binoculars out, and she was a beautiful prostitute. And she became my client, too.
The prostitute?
Absolutely, not the poodle.
What was the case that she became your
what? A little soliciting, is that bad?
What was it?
A little soliciting.
Little soliciting.
I mean, everyone has to make a living.
And by the way, you're for legalizing
I'm for legalized prostitution.
prostitution.
Sure, I certainly am. I don't even think it's close. First of all, the girls would be safe. The customers would be safe. There's never been a case of sexually transmitted disease emanating from one of the brothels here in Nevada. The girls have to go to the doctor. No one's forcing them to work. They make a decent living. They eat well. I visited these brothels in preparation of cases on occasion and never heard a complaint from them. I much prefer to see somebody working in an atmosphere like that rather than going into some back alley and engaging in some $20 trick.
So you believe in anything that can be taxed turning legal?
I believe in anything where consenting adults who aren't hurting one another can do. I don't even get into the economic aspect yet. I'm just saying.
How about cocaine? How about heroin? You're legalizing that?
Absolutely, all of it.
So legalize all of it
all
and tax
of it.
it.
And if they want to kill themselves, let them kill themselves.
But how do you say that and then you turn around and you say if you do graffiti in the city of Vegas, we should cut your thumb off?
Because it was my beautiful stone tortoise that some punk kid graffitied. So I wanted to teach people a lesson, and I suggested that we go on TV, not just cut the thumb off. That wouldn't do any good. It just hurt him. I wanted everyone to see the thumb being cut off.
And you were serious about this?
Oh, I'm dead serious about it. And I like stockades too. They could take these graffiti people. I haven't seen a Picasso out there, by the way, who's messing up the walls, okay?
But so legalize coke, legalize heroin, legalize prostitution, but cut thumbs off if somebody does graffiti?
Absolutely.
How are you processing
Because
that?
they're hurting somebody when they graffiti a building. That person has to spend a lot of money, or the city has to spend a lot of money to make it clean again, or else you have just an outrageous blight taking place all over the place. And with these other things, you're just hurting yourself. It's like I have 4 children, none of whom drink and drive. Now, that wasn't an a priori decision on their part. They learned that drinking and driving is bad. You're going to get in a lot of trouble. And the same thing, you teach them that taking coke is bad. Taking opioids is bad, unless you need them in order to appease pain. But if they want to hurt themselves, they're not hurting anybody else. Let them hurt themselves. There are people. I mean,
Cutting a thumb off. You're pretty hardcore. I mean, you're
No,
going
I'm
to.
not.
That's biblical time. That's like the Middle East.
Well, I'm not taking eyes out, but if the kid did it again, and we caught him, by the way.
You've been spending a little too much time with mobs.
No. We caught the kid who had graffitied.
Did you cut his thumb off? Or?
Let's put it this way. I went to the judge and I said, as part of his sentence, I want this kid to come up to my office in City Hall and apologize to the city of Las Vegas. And when he came up, he brought his father with him, and I had a machete on my desk.
Come on.
I had a machete on my desk, and I promise you this, after he got through stuttering, I could assure he's never going to graffiti anything again.
So the key is machete, not cutting the thumbs off, is what you're saying.
No, I'm saying that he thought I meant business.
How old was the kid?
Probably about 17.
You probably messed with this kid's mind for the rest of his
I
life.
hope
He's
I
going to
did.
remember you.
I hope
he
I
has
did.
nightmares about a
I
mayor
hope I
from
did, but
Vegas
that
every night.
That won't stop him from going to a prostitute, though, okay? But it will stop him from graffitiing.
Maybe he is now a customer to that prostitute walking the poodle. Maybe there's a connection there.
No, she's older than Methuselah. She's a female Methuselah.
So go back to you're in the apartment, 2-bedroom. So
Right.
you're finding who is your neighbors, and then you have $87. Rent is $87. How are you getting your first customer? How did you get your first client to get your career going?
Before we go there, I said to Carolyn, I said, you have to get a job, sweetheart. And she got a great job in advertising and publicity over at the Riviera Hotel, and really was very, very good at it. So we had a little bit of money coming in. I made a little bit of money in the DA's office. After I took the bar, I went to work for the public defender's office. I learned an awful lot there too. My first 6 cases as a public defender, I won them. Either when I say I won them, I have to define that. I got them dismissed. I worked out a deal that the client could not refuse. So they were very successful. Of course, I was court appointed for all intents and purposes. The clients were not paying me because I was a public defender. Not one of these clients thanked me. I guess, I don't know why they didn't thank me, but...
And you remember that, out of the 6, none of them thanked you?
Not one thanked me, and the first case I got as a private lawyer on a referral from somebody, I lost it and they thanked me for trying so hard. It always taught me that there's nothing wrong with charging a client, and also I learned where there's a fee, there's a remedy. So I'm not one of these lawyers who had people come into his office and say, oh, I can't do it, or it's not going to be good. If I took their money, they knew I would work as hard as any human being could work to make sure that it had an appropriate result.
So how did this so-called community called, that some people call mobsters, now obviously you know...
Well, they were mobsters in those days.
How did you find them though? How did you all of a sudden get into that?
You know, a lot of people, wise guys, I call them authors who write stories that Oscar Goodman was sent out by the mob to represent their interests in Las Vegas. Well, the mob would not send me out with $87 in my pocket. I mean, if I was coming out, I'd be coming out in a chauffeured limo and with a little bit of money in my pocket. It happened all by accident. My dad, who I told you before I love more than life itself, he thought of a great present, a great gift when we came out here. First of all, he wasn't happy we were coming to Las Vegas. It took him years to accept the fact they were going to Las Vegas because
why was that?
Because he had the impression that many people in the public had at that time that it was Sin City and it wasn't a place where people should live.
Oh, even then, the reputation of Vegas was...
Oh, absolutely. More so then. They had a book called The Greenfeld Jungle, and everybody read it. They gave my father 100 copies of it. He read it. He was going crazy. His son was going to Las Vegas, and when people said, where's Oscar? He said he moved to Phoenix. He couldn't even say that his son moved to Las Vegas. But he sent us a gift. He sent us $20 a month, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was all the money in the world, with the proviso that it had to be used for entertainment purposes. It couldn't be used for rent, couldn't be used to pay taxes. It had to be used to take Carolyn out to dinner, to see a movie, something along that line.
Interesting.
There was a hotel where the Mandalay now is, it was called the Hacienda, and Carolyn, she was the first counter, believe it or not. She didn't know she was a card counter, but her parents played a game called concentration, where you take 52 cards, you turn them face down, so all you saw was the cover of the card, and you picked up one at a time and you had to match them with each other, and when you matched them you took them off, whoever had the most at the end of the day. Well, that's the way her mind worked. So we would have a nice little dinner, and usually had about $5 or $10 left over, and she would sit down to the blackjack table, and invariably she would play the $5 or $10 and win, and whenever she won she put it in her purse. And when we lost, she lost $5 or $10. I was smart enough in those days to know that you had to be thought of as a sucker by the dealers and by the floor men and by the pit bosses if you're playing, because no one's going to beat them. So I would stand behind her. And it was a different Vegas in those days, maybe a much friendlier Vegas. And I would talk to the dealer, the same dealer all the time, a fellow by the name of Bob Butler. He was a very pleasant guy, very pleasant, and we became friends over the card deck. One day he calls me up, he said, I'd like you to do a little legal work for me. And I did a nice little legal work for $250. I still remember, including the cost. He was happy, I was happy.
It's a good amount back then. That's
not a good amount, it was $250, but
and your rent is $87, so it's kind of like $4,000 today.
Well, see, only a guy like you who's that smart could figure that out, and you're absolutely right. We carried on the friendship after that. A phone call came into the Hacienda Pit. Who's the best criminal lawyer in Las Vegas? Nothing's changed over the years. Guy picks up the phone, he cups it. Who's the best criminal lawyer in Las Vegas? And the guy I did the $250 case for said, call Oscar. And that's the way it all started.
Wow, simple as that,
referral. And it turned out that the fellow who called me was Bob Martin. Bob Martin was the odds maker for the world.
Canada?
No, that was Mel Horowitz.
Okay.
Mel's brother was the one who was in trouble. He called Bob, who's the best criminal lawyer, and I get a phone call at home. Come on over to such and such an address. I said, excuse me? We have a case for you. So I say to Carolyn, because I'm not brave, she's brave, I said, sweetheart, take a ride with me. Because I was scared to go. So we went over.
Literally, you were scared
I was scared to death. When you hear a voice like that, I wasn't used to hearing a voice like that come right over. And I went up to the door, and a guy hands me an envelope. He says, here's your retainer, 3 dimes, and you better win the case. I didn't know what he was talking about, 3 dimes. What is 3 dimes? So I said, all right. And he says, we'll get a phone call tomorrow. I said, fine. I go to the car. I said, sweetheart, go around the corner. Let me look what's in this envelope. I saw $3,100 bills. Never saw so much money at one time in my entire life. And I said, I better win this case. Well, it was the kind of case you can't win. It was called a Dyer Act, where this fellow who retained me's brother was caught in a stolen car, apparently in Arizona, here in Nevada, and all the government had to prove was a car was stolen, and it was stolen and taken across state lines. And whoever's behind the wheel, 999 times out of 1,000 would be convicted. Well, I got real lucky. I tried the case on St. Valentine's Day. I think the jury must have felt sorry for me, and I thought it was a fun story, where we make our closing arguments, the jury's instructed. My law office was about a block and a half from the courthouse. The judge says, be on call. I said, yes, Your Honor, and walked back to my office, and on the way back, the mobster brother, the guy who was taking care of the fellow I represented, he was a mobster, but a nice mobster, bookmaking type offenses. It didn't bother anybody.
Earner. He was a moneymaker.
He didn't hurt anybody. He says, is it better if the jury takes a long time to come to its verdict or a short time? I said, oh, here I am. I'm like a big shot. My first federal case. I said, oh, it's not even close. The longer they take, the better we are. I walk into my office, the phone's ringing. Jury has a verdict. Oh, I said, I told you, the faster the better. And we went back there, they found him not guilty. Well, that's the way it all started, because Mr. Horowitz was a friend of Meyer Lansky. And Meyer Lansky was the national mob syndicate's financial genius. He and Lucky Luciano were the people.
Most people know Lucky, but Meyer is he's a heavy guy. I mean,
the heaviest.
Yeah.
I mean, in the world of that world,
yeah,
he was the biggest. And he got indicted out here. He got indicted for skim, which is taking money before taxes are being paid on it, taking it out of the system. And he was living down in Miami at the time. His lawyer, Dave Rosen, was a friend of mine, having met each other in a case where we defended the first wiretap case in the United States down in Florida. And I was fortunate enough to have my client severed, and the case was ultimately dismissed against him. So I developed a little bit of a reputation through no fault of my own. I was a very, very lucky fellow. And when Lansky gets indicted, Rosen, his real lawyer, calls me and said, will you represent him on a local basis? So I did, and there were some very prominent defendants in the case. The 2 fellows who owned the Fontainebleau in Miami were defendants in the case, and they were represented by world-class lawyers, Edward Bennett Williams from Washington, D.C., Bill Hundley, who was Robert Kennedy's right-hand man. I'm filing motions to dismiss based on Lansky's poor health. And the government's saying, there's nothing wrong with Lansky. We have pictures of him walking his little poodle down. I wonder what this is, my next door neighbor's poodle. Walking the same poodle, walking a poodle down 21st and Collins. Showed pictures of Lansky, and I'm saying, I have letters from the doctor saying he's too sick to go to trial, he's too ill. And finally, the others go to trial, they're all found guilty. Lansky does not go to trial. and the judge dismisses his case. So from that point on, I am the lawyer in the country for certain kind of people.